And we are back at a slightly different angle. Had to sit up a little bit. So now let's get into a little bit deeper classical Greeks and why they're so important. Classical Greeks are so important because they lay the foundation for everything that we do in the field of communication. I know you don't believe me. More importantly, I know that you're like, so what? Give me the modern stuff, give me the new stuff, give me the stuff I need to know now. Don't give me the history of where it came from. Except if you know where it came from, you can be much better at what we do than you already are. And I don't know anyone who just sits back and says, I don't need to be better. So I want you to understand that this was one of Plato's or Aristotle's and Cicero's points. So you know, um, if you understand where things come from, you understand how things came about, and you're more likely to be able to do it again, to replicate it and to adapt it to a particular situation. Did you hear that? That's right. If you want me to tell you how to give a really great speech or to write one for you, I certainly can do that. That is no problem at all. I know people who get paid a lot of money to do that sort of thing. But if you want me to teach you how to write your own speeches and how to do it well yourself so that you could go out and make a ton of money doing it. Wait a minute. I just realized I don't make a ton of money doing it right now. Why is everybody else making money? Because you're paying for your education. So we give this to you so that you can utilize it later. Imagine what you could do if you didn't only know how to respond in a crisis situation, say in PR, but you knew why you were responding that way. Imagine how you could change and adapt it. So rhetoric being the art or skill of knowing in a particular instance all the means of persuasion doesn't just mean that we know them. It means that we're able to work with them. It means that we're able to do them. So that's why this is important. Buckle up your seatbelts, kids. I have a bad feeling it's going to be a long one. Okay, so let's talk about the four main schools of thought in classical Greece. Now, what is classical Greece? Why do I call it that? I call it that because we're basically talking about Greece until about 100 BCE, so about 100 years before the Common Era. We're not even getting into the Common Era. We're going to stay way back in Greece when it was thriving as a democracy and when it was being set up by the philosophers themselves for a democratic government. And when you read your book, you're going to see that that's exactly what was being attempted. Now, say attempted, and you'll see why here in a few minutes. But remember that the goal of rhetoric stayed the same from the time of Aristotle. So even though there's this great debate going on between Aristotle and Plato, and we'll talk about that, even though there's that great debate happening, something comes out of it that we still use today. So let's just sort of dig in. We already know that the first pieces of rhetoric, besides the Enchiridion on Helen, which we talked about in the last video, include things like the Odyssey, the Iliad, the great epic poems. Those great epic poems are designed to do something very specific. They're designed to persuade you of gods who exist, of what good choices you should make, of what defines a hero, of what defines good and what defines truth, and so on. I mean, those poems are not just entertaining. Not even that, right? Those, and some of you may have never read them, but if you ever just pick one of them up or just read a part of it, you'll be like, why the heck would anybody read this, right? And that's a darn good question. I will say that my husband, Jason, was named after Jason and the Huguenots. So if you are a fan of really, really classical literature and epic poetry, you'll understand that he has a lot to live up to, actually. So it's Jason and the Golden Fleece, if that rings a bell to any of you. So we keep using these, and these are reference points that we use, and we say that, we should be more like Hercules, or we should be, or that person has an Oedipus complex. Where does all that come from? It comes from those epic poems. So true classical Greece art that's supposed to persuade us of something, particularly good and bad, particularly truths and untruths, things that are in the world and are not in the world, what makes the good life, what doesn't make the good life. Plato was our first. He was the most interested in philosophy That is finding the good in life, right? Study of how we live. That's what philosophy means if you break it down. Um, so we were all like, well, what about Socrates? Okay, lots to say about Socrates another day when we have more time. But Socrates actually is a name that we use to represent intelligence, or sort of the classic knowable one, the great thinker, the person who represents wisdom. So, what Socrates actually did as far as contributing to our particular area of interest. Well, first of all, he wasn't interested in rhetoric. Okay, he really, really wasn't. Although he was put to death for the same reason that a lot of these other philosophers were put to death, which was corrupting the youth. And the way that they were corrupting the youth, despite what you might think, it doesn't mean quite what it means today. Corrupting the youth meant that they were teaching them how to be free and how to move through the classes and all these other things. So Socrates was put to death for teaching people how to live in the world in such a way that was more free, is the way we would describe it today, I think, and more democratic. Plato, of course, was his student. Plato was like, I don't need any of that. You know why? Because I am that good. Plato honestly believed, I'm not sure, that Plato isn't just a conglomeration of different people, but if you read him, he really kind of says, look, rhetoric is horrible for the world. It distorts the truth. It can say that something is good and bad at the same time. It can literally make a lie seem true and the truth seem like a lie. That was his problem with rhetoric. Those are the three main problems he had, was that it distorted what was actually true because human interpretation distorted the truth. And you might be thinking to yourself, well, wait a minute, wasn't he actually doing that? And the answer is yes. Yes, he was. But Plato also believed that he was the chosen philosopher king. What is a philosopher king? A philosopher king is a monarch that rules because they know what's best for the people. Now, I don't know what happens when he dies. I mean, does he appoint a successor? I don't really know how that would work, but I don't honestly believe that when he was speaking, it was philosophy, but when everybody else was speaking, it was rhetoric. So all of us were distorting the truth except for Plato. It's been dead for like 2,500 years, so I'm not really sure what we're supposed to do with that now. The key parts of Plato that are really important is that he does describe the difference between democracy and a philosopher king, really a monarchy, where one person's at rule. He's really defining for us the difference between a centralized monarchy government, centralized power, a decentralized power, or more like democracy. And so his students didn't necessarily want the same thing Plato did. I just started talking to my dissertation advisor fairly recently again. We tend to not like those people who guide us because we disagree with them at some point, and who wants that? So who was his student? Well, his student was Aristotle. A lot of times people say, well, Isocrates was around the same time as Aristotle and they were competitors. That's not true, actually. Isocrates was around the time of Plato. Oh, did you notice what I just did there? Isocrates, not Socrates. You're like, who's that guy? Isocrates, very important, more important to us even than Socrates, which we'll get to in a minute. And then finally, the fourth group. So we have Plato, Aristotle, we have Isocrates, and then the fourth group we just group as the sophists. The sophists, of course, are these group of people who taught and believed in the way that we think about rhetoric in its worst form, in a lot of ways. That, if you needed someone to speak for you on your behalf in court, you could pay them to go do that for you. But I know what that is. That's kind of a lawyer today, right? Or they would teach you the rules and regulations of rhetoric, actually just public speaking, really. But they would teach you public speaking so that if you had to go back to court again, you didn't need to pay them again. You would be able to adapt and speak for yourself. Who does that sound like? Yeah, teachers. That's right. So the sophists of 2,500 years ago or further back are actually still the people that are around today. We just have a different name for them. And I don't think any of them are necessarily evil, but you can see how they would get a bad rap. You know, teachers think that they're elitist and that they're more important, that they know more than anybody else about everything. Not true, by the way. Um, or a lawyer. Come on, greasy, slimy. Ugh. Even I don't like lawyers. My dad was one, right? So we gave them a bad name back when they were sophists because we said they were not interested in democracy. In fact, they weren't interested in the truth at all. They were not interested in philosophy. They were not interested in doing what was best for the entire community. They were interested in only winning or losing for their client, whatever way that they did that. Okay, that was really nice of me. We're interested in money. That's what they were interested in. And so when my friend who has a PhD in communication, just like I do, she has a debate background, just like I do. She quit the academy. She stopped teaching at the University of Hawaii. Like literally 3 days after she got tenure, she was like, I'm out of here. I'm not really sure why that happened, but that was several years ago now. She runs her own business where she shows people how to find their sparkle. Yeah, that's what she does. And I'm teaching you how to actually discover what you need to teach people. And guess who makes a lot more money? I'll just give you a wild guess there. So is she a sophist? Yes, she is. Yes, she is. And every time she puts out a book, I write a review, and that review, without question, uses the word sophistry at least 3 times. And she always laughs, and it is funny in a way to us. It's probably not so funny to people who want to firmly believe that there's a philosophy where we only do good for other people, because what am I laughing at? I'm laughing because people are gullible enough to buy her books. In a lot of ways, it just seems silly when you could pay, more, but you get education where you never need another one of her books ever again. So I find it. I have a struggle. That's the struggle that was going on in Greece at the time. So the sophists had always been there since the land wars. I think it was the Peloponnesian Wars, but I'm not a historian. See, something I don't know. So I think it was the Peloponnesian Land Wars. I'm not really sure which ones it was, where people would come back and, hey, we won, so I should get your land and my land. And other people going, no, you won, you can keep this land. I'm going over there. Or, no, I get to keep my land. You don't get to take my land just because you won the war. It was problematic. So what they did was they went to court. They had a judge decide, and person A makes their argument, person B makes their argument, and then the judge determined what was right. Does this look familiar? It should, because that's where we come to the point of stasis. Arguments, decision. Because the decision has to be made. Can't all live in the same space. Okay? So that's how this sort of started. And people started saying, I can't do this on my own. I need a sophist to go in and speak for me. Some of you might feel that way. Our system is currently set up in such a way that you almost have to have a lawyer speak for you. They won't let you do it on your own all the time. In some things they will, very small things, they'll let you speak for yourself. For the most part, we have to pay somebody else to do it. And that's where all of this comes from. In fact, there's a really great story about a supposed, I don't know if this was just like, I think this is made up by one of the Greek writers, a story about Corax and Tisias. Corax was a teacher. He was a sophist. And Tisias was his student. And after Tisias paid what he was supposed to pay, Corax taught what he was supposed to taught, Tisias decided to sue Corax. He said that Corax did not teach him as well as he was supposed to be taught. Therefore, he wanted his money back. So go to court. The judge listens to their arguments. And of course, what are their arguments? Well, Tisias says, I win. I mean, obviously, I did not get the education I was supposed to. More importantly, if you think I don't win, that proves my point. This guy didn't teach me well enough to beat him, right? And Corax says, give me a break. I win. I fulfilled my contract. I took the money and gave you your education. And more importantly, if you win, that proves I did my job because I taught you how to speak well enough to defeat me. And there we have the perfect debate, right? The perfect debate does not have an answer. Now, the perfect debate might actually, come from science, like the perfect ending, the perfect claim, the perfect conclusion may come from the hard sciences, from empiricism, from, as I talked about in my last video, sight, smell, taste, feeling, and hearing. It might come from more senses than that. I don't know how many of you are into like psychic sort of things, but the truth of the matter is we have other senses, we just don't have names for them. For example, there's a sense of time. We constantly are aware of time, right? So that's another like sort of sense that we have, but because time is not dictated by nature, it's made up by humans, we tend to not consider that empirical. Now, all that aside, because that's really not important, what we do know is that that means the realm of rhetoric, the art of rhetoric, has to be not scientific. It has to be about probability and likelihood, not scientific. And that was Aristotle's point. So let's break down the four of these for you as you start to read. Start with Plato. Plato says that the world exists out there. We can sense it with our five senses. That is the truth. If we cannot express exactly that, then we are not telling the truth. In fact, we're all lying all the time because if we use rhetoric, that distorts the truth. When you read Phaedrus, you're going to see that. When you read Phaedrus, you're going to be confused because in that piece, Plato, using the voice of Socrates, you'll see that his character is Socrates. He tells Phaedrus, "Oh, you saw this great speech given by Lysias. Congratulations. What made it so great?" And Lysias goes through and repeats the speech and says, "Here's why it was so fantastic." Of course, Lysias repeating that speech is an act of rhetoric in of itself. So Plato says, "Oh, let me make sure I understand this correctly. What you're saying is," and then Plato repeats the speech. And he does so in a way that proves that you could argue this one way or the other. Should I learn from a lover or should I learn from a non-lover? That's the question that Lysias is asking. Should I learn from a lover or should I learn from a non-lover? And ultimately, Lysias decides you should learn from the non-lover, because if you learn from the lover, you're going to be distracted and you're going to listen to whatever they have to say, and you're not going to care about the truth. Sound familiar yet? So Plato takes that apart. He says, look, here's 5 things that may seem great about rhetoric. You can make the ugly turn pretty. You can make the truth be more truthful if you wanted to, or less truthful. You can do all these things with rhetoric, and those 4 things are what makes it bad. So when you read it, don't actually, you can't quit. You got to keep going, because Plato does not come to the conclusion that rhetoric is good. At no time. I have had people read Phaedrus in the past and go, well, he's saying that rhetoric is fine. Here's his list of reasons why rhetoric is good. And it's like, just read a little bit past that and you'll see that what he's really saying is, because you can turn anything into what you want, because he was able to repeat Lysias's speech, because Phaedrus was able to repeat it and do it the way that they wanted to do it, that practice in of itself pulls us further away from the truth. I don't believe that in order to get to the good life, you had to get to the truth. Rhetoric is another step away from the truth. Now, if you're familiar with Plato, you may be familiar with the fact that he was extremely idealistic, that he actually had the theory of the ideal forms. The theory of the ideal forms says that at some point in our lives, we all pass through this world. It's called the noumenal world. That's Noumenal. Make sure I can spell that. The noumenal world. And nobody knows where this is, by the way. Is it like when you're in the womb? Is it when you're born? Is it prior to all that? And we don't really know, and neither did Plato. But we pass through this world where we see the perfect everything, the ideal form of everything. The ideal form of love, the ideal form of beauty, the ideal form of peace, the ideal chair. the ideal couch, the ideal television. I mean, all these things that we see from the most abstract to the most mundane. And everything that we do on earth is just bastardization of that. We're trying to reach that ideal and we're failing miserably. Right? I mean, the chairs that you're sitting in right now might be comfortable, but the chairs in the classroom are not. So, which one's closer to the ideal? Definitely yours, I would imagine. But ones in in the classroom take us even further away from the ideal. And then I'm describing it to you. They're hard plastic. They don't bend very well. They're difficult to deal with. They are uncomfortable as all get out, especially if you're a bigger girl like me. They're terrible, right? But me telling you that is another step away from the truth. And so what we end up with, according to Plato, when we practice the art of rhetoric, is just further and further away from the truth, which is further and further away from the good, which makes us further and further away from the good life, which is not what we want to do. And that's why he was a philosopher. That's why he claimed to be a philosopher, and no one else could possibly do that. So that's Plato. Plato believed that rhetoric only hid or modified or mutated the truth. It changed it. So, of course, Aristotle was Plato's student, and Aristotle loved a lot of Plato's ideas, right? He really liked the idea that we could use rhetoric to do these things, but he believed that there was no such thing as rhetoric if there was no truth. So, if you say, oh, look, the president is telling a lie, his rhetoric is driving me nuts, no matter who that president is. By the way, I'm going to be generic. Okay. So he's not telling the truth. He's lying. It's just empty rhetoric, or it's just rhetoric. I mean, we've been hearing this for I've been alive for 45 years. So at least 45 years, probably more than that. That's just rhetoric. It's just flowery language. That's just lies. Then Aristotle would be like, excuse me, that's not the definition of rhetoric. The definition of rhetoric requires ethics. What ethic could it possibly require? The ethic that we tell the truth, that we are not liars, that we represent the truth as best we can. And so Plato and Aristotle obviously butted heads on this, because Plato believed that in order to have a good government, in order to have a good life, in order to truly get to the truth, you need multiple perspectives from people, which means you have to be able to share your experiences, which means to do that truthfully through the art of rhetoric, and then we have the good life. Plato said that's a bunch of bunk. You get the good life by listening to me and by experiencing the world for yourself. So get out there and do it yourself, and don't try to pretend like you can express that in any other way than for someone to experience it. So they greatly differed. So Plato kind of went, he's not having anything to do with rhetoric anymore. And so Aristotle's like, I'm going to go off and start my own school. Of course, Plato, his school was called the Academy. And we call things the Academy for that specific reason, because Plato invented it. If you're wondering what was Aristotle's school called, because you don't hear about it very much, but it was called the Lyceum, Lyceum. And the Lyceum was a place where Aristotle said, hey, come and learn from me about how to use rhetoric to be informed for the purpose of more learning, or to be informed for the purpose of a better democracy, which leads to a better life, which leads to the good life and the truth. And Aristotle has a lot of rules and regulations for that. A lot of rules and regulations you may have already heard. A lot of rules and regulations you should have already learned. Let's walk through just a few of them, okay, before I wrap up here. One of the first ones is obviously the three different types of rhetoric, genres of rhetoric, if you will. Those three genres are very clear. Aristotle is very clear that anything outside of this is not rhetoric. He has ceremonial, which I've already talked about in my last video. It's called epideictic address or ceremonial. The second type is judicial or deliberative. deliberative rhetoric literally means that we deliberate about something. So it's when we're considering a new policy or a new law, what we should or what we should not do. It's really where, Congress is dealing with rhetoric. And then last but not least is, and certainly not least because it's probably the one we practice the most, is forensic, right? The idea of taking something apart, putting it back together so that people understand it better. Teachers do this all the time. You may not realize it, but there's a lot more that I'm not telling you than there is that I share with you. It's important for teachers to be able to figure out what the good things are to tell you, what's important, what's necessary for you to get that absolute bare minimum out of whatever it is that we want you to know. But in order to get a PhD, I would say a master's, but not really. But in a PhD program, in order to earn that PhD, you have to demonstrate that you know everything about a particular field. So I don't know a whole lot about anything else. But ask me about rhetoric and the history of rhetoric, and we're good. Okay, or about political communication, we're good. Anything else? I know nothing. I literally can make a can of SpaghettiOs, right? So the idea of the forensic genre is literally a political scientist. There's someone who takes what the government is doing, explains it to the citizens. If you want to think about it a different way, it's people taking what economics is and explaining it to the people. It's someone taking global geopolitics, obviously global geopolitics, and distilling it down enough for you to understand what you need to understand in order to function in the world. People say to me all the time, I can't vote because I don't understand anything. Well, according to most theorists, the only thing you really need to know is what you see on political ads, what you hear from the speeches of the candidates, and what you see on whatever news channel you watch. I would disagree with that, but at the bare minimum, what is it that you can get? And those talking heads on TV, their only job is to explain those more complex ideas to you. That's their job. That's what they do. Second thing that's key besides those three genres is understanding how Aristotle believed that rhetoric was persuasive. There are three things. Hey, guess what? There's three things. Actually, I'm going to start with two. He said there's two ways to prove an argument. There's artificial ways to prove an argument and inartificial, or artistic and inartistic. I don't care which way you put them. It's fine either way. All we need to know is that the artificial, the artistic come from human beings. They come from us. Those are the proofs that we deduce, we reason out, and that we share. Inartificial or inartistic means that it comes from those five senses. It comes from empiricism. It comes from science. It comes from knowing exactly what it is that's there. We don't need to debate if the sky is blue or not. It's sort of a light gray. But the point is, we don't need to debate that, right? We don't need to debate whether or not the sun is going to, quote unquote, rise tomorrow. I really don't want to have an argument about the fact that we go around the sun. It doesn't rise. Okay, we know. The point is that those things which we have established do not need to be debated. Again, we're talking about what's probably true, not what we're seeing with our own eyes. And so that's the realm of rhetoric. Okay, so inartificial or inartistic, and artistic, artificial. Let's talk about those for a second. Now, the inartificial or the inartistic, I don't really need to spend a whole lot of time on. I think I just gave you every example I've ever given to anybody ever. So, we don't need to really get into that. What we're focused on more than anything else, although those inartificial proofs are extremely important to have, that's why we ask you to have evidence and data when you're making a claim, right? Those are incredibly important to have, but to be truly persuasive, you need to have the artificial proofs as well. And there are three of them. You have to have all three. If anybody ever said, one of the three is fine. No, it's not. Not according to Aristotle, at least. What are those three? Ethos, pathos, logos, blah, 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 right? You already know that one. Ethos, of course, being credibility. What is credibility made up of? Well, a lot of people say it's ethics. Well, being an ethical person certainly helps. But credibility is made up of character, good credibility and ethics. You're a good person. but also that you have goodwill towards your audience, that your audience feels like you care about them getting what they need to get out of your particular writing or your particular speech, etc., your particular communication. The second, competence. Competence meaning that you know what you're talking about, but also that you look like you know what you're talking about. That's pretty important. My mom always said that, I'm not her favorite, and you'll find out why in a second, but she used to always say things like, "Oh, Beth, yeah, she could swim through a river of mud and come out on the other side and convince you she's clean. Thanks, Mom." She's also been known to say things like, "Oh, Beth, she's not that smart, but she'll make you think she is." So I'm not really sure. I don't think those are compliments, but perhaps we're getting at that idea of competence. Am I truly competent? Is the speaker truly competent or not? If they're not, they don't have ethos. They're not going to have ethos there. Do they have goodwill towards me? I believe they have the best intentions in the world. That's not going to help if we don't have all the components. So ethos is a lot bigger than just ethics, right? The second thing is pathos. Pathos is not just a Sarah McLachlan commercial with puppies being mistreated or whatever it is that she does now, with her song Angel playing in the background. You know the commercials. Yes, those are pathetic appeals. They are appeals to emotion. Whenever we make a decision on emotion, it's bad. Never buy a car on emotion. Never get married on emotion. Use some practicality and some reasoning here, people. Don't ever just go to school because you think you should and you felt like it at 3 o'clock in the morning. Don't shop while you're taking Ambien. There are a lot of reasons not to vote or not to do things, emotionally. Don't vote emotionally either, right? But emotion is one part of it. And when he talks about this, he's very clear. He says, it's not just about creating emotion. It's about and pathetic, getting the empathy, the pathos of it. It's also about making sure that you are charismatic, enthusiastic about your subject in whatever way that means, and that combined with the goodwill of ethics, those two things make people listen to you. Now, if they're going to listen to you, they need something else from you. That's logos. I know. Logic. Nope. The word logos in Greek actually means word, not it doesn't mean logic. However, when Aristotle talks about logos, he's talking about how we use language to express the argument that we want our audience to know. What words we choose change the position that we're sharing with our audience. And therefore, if you are doing that well and you've got your audience listening to you, then you'll be successful in persuading your audience. So those are the main things I'm going to talk about with Aristotle today. This video is now 32 minutes long, 33 minutes long, and I'm starving. So I'm going to go get dinner. But when I come back maybe later today or early tomorrow, I'm going to start finishing off with Aristotle, talk about Isocrates a little bit more, get into the sophists before we move on to the Romans. So I'm taking my time doing these videos. You take your time reading. And this is the hardest part. This is the hardest part. We'll start moving faster and reading stuff that you actually understand very soon. I promise. Any questions, comments, or concerns, just send them my way. See you soon.